I think it's important for us to understand what's happening around the world, because we're Americans first, but we live in a world where we have to be concerned about what's happening in other parts of the world, particularly as it relates to our brothers and sisters, those that are also in the body of Christ. And we have some people here, George being one of them, who are focused on ministry all over the world. We have people here that are involved in missions. And I think most of them will tell you that there's sort of a constant and growing theme around the world today, and that's the persecution of Christians. But you know, we're always, at least in the last 2 decades, right on the precipice of going to war somewhere. We've been at war for 13 years now in Afghanistan and a lesser time in Iraq. But let's walk with me around the world, and then when I finish here, Rick's going to come up and we're just going to take some of your questions. It might be on your mind, and I don't know that we can answer them all, but we'll do our very best. So give me the first slide, if you would. Talk about the global situation. Next slide. And there's some general themes of things that are going on today. And obviously the first one is the persecution of Christians. And, you know, just in the last 3 years, the rate at which Christians are being persecuted and killed and driven out of their homes that they've lived in, you know, for 2.5 centuries, and their families have lived in for 2.5 millennia, really. They're being driven out of those all over the world today. So we've got a constant theme of persecution of Christians. And then we've got the growing problem of Islam versus the West. As the Muslim Brotherhood continues to gain strength all over the world, not just in North Africa and the Middle East, but in the continent of Europe and South America, where there's a growing Islamic problem. It's Islam against the West, but we also see just within the last couple of years, we now see Islam versus Islam. We see Sunni Shia killing Shias, and we see other Islamic groups that have paired off against each other. And so we see a kind of, I don't know that it's necessarily new, but it's one that we're paying more attention to. And then we see the tribal or clan warfare that's occurring. Southern Sudan is a perfect example where 2 tribes there have paired off against each other, and there's a major humanitarian problem there in Southern Sudan now, as the clans are literally killing each other and creating a huge refugee problem, if you will. And then there's an upsurge of Marxism, and you see it particularly in our hemisphere, as you see more and more of a Marxist trend, not just in America. And I told you last night, I mean, we're clearly following the Marxist model here in this country. But in South America, you see an upsurge of Marxist theology all through South America. So I think we need to be concerned about where that's taking our hemisphere. And then our influence across the world is declining. We have been, I think, judged to be an unreliable ally. And do not think for 1 minute that the whole world does not watch how we treat Israel. They watch that because they know that Israel is our strongest and most enduring ally. And they watch how we treat a country like that. We have other allies that have been traditional allies. Britain is certainly one of those. Australia, the English-speaking nations that have always stood with us. And then there are others, other European nations and Asian nations, South Korea, Thailand, have always been close allies. Everybody watches how we treat Israel as a measure of how reliable we are as an ally. And I must tell you that I think that we have a rabbi here who lives in Jerusalem, and I think that he will tell you is that the Israelis no longer trust us as an ally. They don't know where we're going to come down and where we're going to stand when the chips are really down. Go to the first slide, or next slide, please. I want to talk briefly about Syria. First of all, we need to recognize there are no good guys in Syria, period. No good guys. on either side, neither in Bashar al-Assad's government nor in this thing we call the Free Syrian Army, which has basically the Free Syrian Army, which was sort of the catalyst for what's happening there now, has now really been taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood and by Islamic extremists. They now dominate that. So when you think in terms of the rebels fighting against Assad, who is an evil man, you need to think in terms of Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood and recognize that that's really the dominant force now among these rebel forces that are trying to unseat Assad. Assad is being supported certainly by Russia as well as Iran. Russia has a lot at stake. Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean is located in Syria. They do not want Assad to fall because they lose their only naval base there. And then the rebel forces, as I said, are controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. You need to understand, Bashar al-Assad is never going to turn over all of his chemical weapons, period. And that's because Bashar al-Assad stays in power because he has, chemical weapons. Now, understand this. Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite. The Alawites were rejected by both Sunnis and Shias. They're only 10% of the population in Syria. They were rejected by both the Sunnis and the Shias. Until 1974, when Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, paid an Islamic cleric in Lebanon to write a fatwa, or a ruling, a legal ruling, saying that the Alawites were indeed Shias. Now, by the way, that cleric disappeared and was never seen again. But Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite. He is 10% of the population, his people are, of Syria. The only way he stays in power is by having chemical weapons and the threat of chemical weapons. He's not going to turn them all over to the Russians. This is a farce. It is a scam. It's for public consumption. He has not disassembled his capabilities to make more chemical weapons. So even if he did give them all away, all he has to do is make them. This whole thing is a scam to try and get Bashar al-Assad off the earth. But I can assure you, he's going to keep chemical weapons. Now let me tell you this. If those chemical weapons do fall into the hands of these rebel forces, where do you think those chemical weapons are going to wind up? They're going to wind up in Israel. They have already threatened Israel. They have a history of threatening Israel. The interesting thing is even though Bashar al-Assad's father is the one that lost the Golan Heights to the Israelis, Bashar al-Assad has never been a real threat to Israel. But these rebels that are trying to unseat him are very clearly a threat to Israel, and they've made it very public. Their hatred for Israel and what their intentions are in the future. Christians are being killed. There's a village called Mayalula. Mayalula is where the ancient Syriacs live. The Syriacs are the people that actually still speak the Aramaic language. For the last 2.5 months, that city has been under siege, not by Bashar al-Assad's forces, but by these rebel forces who have been killing Christians, beheading priests, raping nuns, and running the children into caves in the mountains. There are no good guys here. But the worst outcome is for these rebel forces